Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Jeremy Smith, Rich Allen, and Tom Williams. I know it seems like the season has been a little rushed to a conclusion, and the characters seem to flip quickly as it comes to the end, but at the end of the day, there should be no more petitions to rewrite the Ligue 1 campaign at least. But who's turned evil in the closing moments, and who has made that heroic sacrifice? All of that and more after the latest headlines. Everyone got that Saturday evening treatment in the penultimate league weekend. So we start with Lille, who put on a real show with a 5-0 thrashing of Angers to cement second place. A double from Nicolas Pepe means that Les Deux will be in the group stage draw of the Champions League next season. Joining them in the competition will be Lyon, who secured third place thanks to their own strong 4-0 win over relegation-threatened Caen. The Normandy side are still in the relegation playoff zone, 2 points from safety and 2 points above the trap door. Dijon will need a win on the final day of the season and hope Caen lose as they lost 4-0 themselves against champions Paris Saint-Germain. Kylian Mbappe scored twice to move on to 32 for the season, but he would have many more headlines come Monday morning. Monaco are all but safe after winning their 6-pointer with Amiens 2-0. Radamel Falcao and Alexander Golovin made sure that only a crazy turn of events on the final day would see them go down, while Amiens may need more than a point on Friday to guarantee their own league and longevity. Saint-Etienne also qualified for Europe as they held on to fourth place with a 3-0 victory over Nice that, combined with Montpellier's 1-1 draw with Nantes, allows Les Verts passage to the Europa League. Already relegated Guingamp salvaged a little pride as they drew 2-2 with Nîmes. Paulo Sousa now has a Bordeaux record of 6 straight defeats as they fell 1-0 to Reims. Rennes got back to winning ways as they won 2-0 over fellow European side Strasbourg. And Marseille are at least trying to entertain to finish the season, winning 5-2 in what could be Rudy Garcia's final game in charge. On Sunday, the UNFP awards were gifted out, but they were kind of overshadowed by Mbappe's revealing speech after winning Player of the Year, foreshadowing his wish to increase his power at the Parc des Princes this summer. And that's all for now. But to keep up to date with all the news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week where we probably didn't predict to be going sort of off the pitch with Mbappe's speech. And just to quickly quote what he actually said at the time, he said, "I feel like it's time for me to have more responsibility. Maybe here in Paris, I would be happy, or maybe somewhere else. In any case, thanks everyone." Tom, it's an interesting statement to make in an interesting place to do it as well. And although some media outlets have said today that he's happy in Paris and he's basically wanting maybe a bit more say in the dressing room and potential incomings, but it's quite the statement from the 20-year-old regardless.
Yeah, I mean, curious timing and a curious decision to decide to do it there and then, you know, an award ceremony right at the end of the season. And I'm still struggling to get my head around what exactly it was that he was trying to achieve from it. I mean, this notion that he wants more responsibility can be interpreted in all sorts of different ways. And it struck me that he decided that he wanted to create some kind of suspense about the possibility of him leaving PSG this summer, but realized that he couldn't just come straight out and do that. So he kind of tacked on this responsibility line. And I'm really not sure what he's getting at there, because, you know, he's already playing in the position that he wants to play in. It's clear that he's going to be PSG's main man going forward in terms of leading the line. You know, he couldn't really have asked much more in terms of support from the club. You know, it's been suggested that had Zinedine Zidane returned to Real Madrid slightly earlier in the season, Mbappe might not have been quite so forthcoming in committing his future to PSG. So I wonder whether this represents a desire on his part and on the part of his entourage to sort of row back a little bit from that. But yeah, and then followed up, as you said, this evening by PSG putting out a statement where they said very clearly, very unequivocally that he wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, strange timing.
Yeah, and it all seems a little bit unusual, Richard. We've mentioned that it's going to be a big summer regardless of Paris Saint-Germain. There's plenty of holes to be plugged and players to be moving on and aims to reach FFP rules. It seems like an unusual time to be committing an ultimatum and sort of saying that he wants improvements in the squad. Well, that's kind of what we're expecting to see, at least in some shape or form this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from wanting to read a little bit too much into it and looking for a bit more of the dramatic side of things, maybe, but it felt a bit like a power move, really, from Mbappe. We'd had only a couple of weeks ago Neymar pretty much going along with the same line that he wanted more responsibility, tantamount to he wanted the captain's armband, and Thomas Tuchel coming out and saying, look, we've got a lot of leaders in the team. This felt like a move from Mbappe to say, well, you know what, back me then. Back me as the main man. We've got a group of big name players in this team. I'm gonna say something like this. It's sort of tossing the old grenade into a crowd kind of thing. Of I'm gonna say this. It's gonna get all the press coverage. You're gonna either have to come out and back me, or there's gonna be a lot of rumors going into the summer. So it's forced PSG to come out with this statement. I don't think it's particularly left a great taste from PSG's point of view. It's not the kind of thing they wanted overshadowing the end of the season, and especially the awards ceremony, where there was already talk with Neymar's absence and his preference for, I think he was at a fashion show or something with Rihanna instead. That didn't leave a great look from my point of view, but from an Mbappe perspective, as I say, it felt for me like a power play move. He wants the club now to back him. He wants, by all accounts, he wants to be the number 9. It seems as though that's he's going to get that wish. But it very much was a case, I think, of Mbappe saying, I am the main man, and now it's time for you to show it.
Yeah, and when two egos collide like that, it's always predicting to do fireworks, and I don't think we all blame Neymar for missing an appointment to go and see Rihanna. I certainly wouldn't blame him in any shape or form, but it was an interesting choice by him regardless, Jez, unless this was something that he'd obviously already planned out and decided to have missed the awards. But it seems almost like a strength battle between these two, and unfortunately, it's starting to look like, even though financial wise, whether that someone can prize either of them away, given the fees that you would have to pay, is unless they sort of waited with players, etc., and others the like to do so. But it's kind of coming to a head that one of them will probably have to go at some point.
Yeah, I think with all that seems to have gone wrong with PSG over the last 2-3 months since that Man United defeat, possibly the one thing that a lot of United fans have been PSG fans rather have been clinging to is that this relationship between Neymar and Mbappe has always seemed so good, and possibly this is the first time that there is going to be a bit of tension and a bit of kind of ego tripping there going forward. I think that we've spoken so many times before about how well Mbappe carries himself, how eloquent he is in interviews, that kind of thing. But the one thing that often does seem to make him bristle is when people sort of talk of him as a youngster and, oh, you're the first teenager to do this, the first 20-year-old to do that. So I think that he was really trying to make a point. I'm not just an amazingly talented kid. I am a serious footballer. Treat me as such. And a lot of people say he's not one of the way that a lot of clubs have got a sort of kind of brains trust of 2 or 3 players who are always the ones that maybe negotiate bonuses or whatever it might be. Mbappe never has been one of those people, but I think maybe he's saying I deserve to be there to really be seen as one of the senior players, even if it's not the case in terms of age. He can certainly turn around and say that this season, obviously it's not their fault, but with Neymar and Cavani injured, he's been the one that sort of held the fort. 32 goals, you can't really complain with the record like that. I mean, he mentioned 40 goals across all competitions and internationally as well. So he's certainly in a powerful position at the moment. And with Neymar not being there again yesterday, yes, he doesn't need to be there. Yes, he didn't need to be there last year when PSG won the title. But all these things to point to the fact that he's not 100% invested. And Mbappe can turn around and say, just look at what I've done for you this year. I've barely missed a match. I'm a kid. I probably should be taking the odd week off. You've barely given me any, but I've still turned up week in, week out. I can understand why he wants to be seen as I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say about someone who's just won Player of the Year, Young Player of the Year, and all the titles he's got, but you can understand why he wants to be seen as a bit more of a senior or serious figure within the squad. And if that means a sort of head-on clash with Neymar, firstly, it could cause even more problems for PSG, and secondly, certainly from my point of view, there should absolutely only be one winner, and if someone has to be shipped out, I think it's got to be Neymar.
And that sort of dawn is coming ever closer. And Tom, it was always going to be a difficult summer anyway for PSG. Sticking within the FFP rules and getting in. Now they're looking at several room midfielders with a couple going out, and realistically they might be looking at centre backs as well, given the performances of some at the back this season. So essentially, this summer becomes possibly the biggest under the QSI era. I mean, it's turning into a boom or bust sort of moment for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and even before you bring Mbappe and Neymar and where they might potentially see their futures lying into the equation, it was already going to be a massive summer. I mean, from the minute that that Rashford stuck that penalty away at part of their prance for Man United in the Champions League, the whole image of PSG's season just changed very dramatically. The squad clearly has several very obvious shortcomings, most notably in central midfield, but also at centre back and various other areas of the team. We seem to get to this point with PSG quite frequently in that that they very often go into seasons talking about the final pieces being added to the puzzle, only to find themselves 9 months later talking about almost having to start all over again. I think it'd be very interesting to see what they do this summer, how much success they're able to get in the transfer window, and at a time when an awful lot of the clubs are undergoing major rebuilds. I mean, Real Madrid most notably, Bayern Munich as well. Juventus have kind of to the end of a cycle. Manchester United. So there's going to be an awful lot of pressure in the transfer market for the sorts of players who PSG are trying to attract. Given the threat of FFP, and we have seen reports in the past that selling one of Mbappe and Neymar, might at some point come into consideration. Given the amount of work that the squad requires. If we do get to a point where one of those players looks like they might be edging towards the exit, perhaps that does become a bigger factor than perhaps any of us thought it would be previously.
Yeah, it all starts to pile up, doesn't it? I mean, the goalkeeping situation with Kevin Trapp coming back on loan, what's going to happen between the three keepers? You can't keep them all on. In fact, it's going to be a struggle to keep even two of them on, given that Areola may be annoyed if he's sort of ousted out from his number one spot. And then you think that right back, Dani Alves isn't getting any younger, and Tom Amunier is sort of shaping for a move at somewhere. There's Tilo Kehrer, who's had an awful season, and Kimpembe's gone backwards and lost the trust of Tuchel reportedly. And then you think that Juan Benat's had an okay second half to the season, but is he really the answer at left back? There's pretty much only Verratti in midfield. You might say Paredes has been pretty awful, and Rabiot's going to be going out the door, and etc. And then it's only really up front where they've actually got players that might stick around, even though Cavani might be on his way as well. And then, like you say, to satisfy FFP, they might try and get one of Neymar and Mbappe, and then can anyone afford them? It's really the more important thing. Can they meet an asking price that Paris Saint-Germain are going to ask for, which is it has to be around the €200 million mark that they paid for Neymar, even if it is Mbappe heading for the door at some point. But Rich, let's go back to the actual awards themselves, at least anyway, and we'll focus sort of on the team of the year. great to see a number of players in there, like Mike Maignan get the goalkeeper of the season. He's well deserved across a number of goalkeepers. But is there a couple of questionable choices in there for you? Maybe in defence, maybe in midfield?
There was for me. It was probably a team of the season that I've had fewest gripes with in recent times. I think for me, there's probably only three positions that I would question. I would perhaps question that centre-back pairing of Silva and Marquinhos. They have had a good season. They've had a great season. But it would have been nice. It's never going to happen, but it would have been nice for, some of the other. We've had a lot of very tight, very well-organised defences in Ligue this season. You look at the likes of Reims, you look at the likes of Nice, who've been, very, very well organised at the back. Even Lille, you look at the impact that someone like Jose Fonts had at Lille. He's been brilliant. I thought it would have been nice, I think, to have seen some of those kind of players recognised. And then in midfield, I think Ndombele may be a fraction on the lucky side. I don't think he's been anywhere near as impactful as he was last season. And Verratti, again, I have my issues with Verratti in terms of how good he actually is and how much progression he's actually made in the last 3 or 4 seasons, because I really don't think he's reached the level that he could have reached. So I think a player like Savanier, who obviously is leading the assist ranking, can feel very unfortunate not to have been included in there. But I feel it's all quite minor gripes. I think overall, it's an 11 that makes some sense. Whereas certainly we've seen in the last few years, we've seen in teams of the season where there's been like, what on earth are they thinking on putting those players in? So it was an 11, I think, that overall makes sense. But I think it would have been nice, as I say, it's never going to happen, but it would have been nice, I think, just to look outside of PSG maybe, because it really doesn't perhaps paint the picture that we want the picture to be painted, in terms of there is depth in Ligue and beyond the runaway champions.
Yeah, and coming on to sort of the both the main awards really were won by Mbappe, but Jez, the managerial award went to Christophe Galtier, and we've sort of mentioned all season that there's maybe 3, 4, or even 5 candidates for this award, but realistically, it has to go to someone that turns relegation candidates into Champions League group stage the team in a year.
Yeah, there's a few decent candidates. Guillaume, Loré for winning the Coupe de la Ligue. I think Vieira has done an extremely underrated job at Nice, for example, as well. But yeah, I think Galtier, I think it would have been a complete injustice if he hadn't got it, what he's done, and not only turning the relegation candidates into second place, but also the style of football that he's played. I think, for the most part, have been the best team to watch in Ligue 1 this year. Putting 5 past PSG is obviously not to be sniffed at, and yeah, I think it was a no-brainer, that one, despite some really good other candidates.
Yeah, credit to him. He's done a fantastic season, and it's great to see Lille get Champions League football. Let's head back to things on the field then, and into the relegation fight that's almost coming to its conclusion. There wasn't quite the twist in the tail, Tom, that we've had in the last couple of weeks. In fact, probably the last month or a half, really, where it's been chopping and changing, and this week was a little bit more cut and dry. And one team that will be really happy after this weekend is Monaco. They won that, what was a sort of relegation 6-pointer, at least for them, 2 against Amiens. They got the win that they needed. It gives them a good gap in terms of goal difference as well as points. They're 3 points ahead of Caen ahead of the final game of the season, and they have a good 7 goals on them. So they've been an almighty swing, and results really going their way for them to end up even in the relegation playoff places. And at least it's job done for Jardim is maybe the way to put it, because they went 7 games without a win and have sort of really stumbled over the line, but at least they've got there.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the way that the team responded to Jardim's return, which obviously went hand in hand with the new recruits all coming in January, and it looked like Monaco might even be looking at a top half finish at some point. And if you'd said then that they'd be approaching the last 2 games of the season, having not yet secured their survival, you would have wondered what had gone wrong. So yeah, I think it'll be a massive relief for them to know that they can go into that final game and know that, you know, barring a miracle, they'll be safe. And yeah, I mean, you know, again, very far from vintage Monaco performance. I have no idea how Falcao's opener was allowed to stand when you look at the fact he basically got two hands on Khalid Adenon's shoulders as he leaps to have the ball in from the corner. But yeah, you know, big relief for Monaco. And yeah, you know, I'm sure they'll be very pleased that, you know, that they can go into that final game and you know, not be looking over their shoulders for the first time in, you know, in a few weeks.
Yeah, and sticking on that game, Tom, they obviously, Amiens were just important of getting the result as well. They remain 2 points above Caen, so they aren't quite safe yet. And really, with their goal difference, if Caen were to win and Amiens to lose on the final day, and Caen have got a home game against Bordeaux, and Amiens will be facing off against already relegated Guingamp, so that they'll be pretty confident their chances at least still. But they had chances in this game. Benalio kept out a couple of good opportunities, and Moussa Konate put one wide. They've had a lot of draws recently as well that have kind of kept them ticking, but not got them quite over the line. They will just be desperate to get the 3 points on Friday night, won't they, and get this over and done with, because really they've been good enough to get themselves away, and they've not just crept over the line yet.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you look at Amiens' form as well. I mean, no wins in 9, and you know, Guingamp's form is almost equally miserable. No wins in 8. But then, you know, Caen Bordeaux, you know, okay, Caen, you know, lost that run of that bit of momentum they'd picked up with that defeat against Lyon on Saturday. But I don't imagine they'll have lost too much sleep about that. And given the way that Bordeaux are going, you know, as you said in the intro, 6 straight defeats, you can quite easily see Caen picking up all 3 points there. And suddenly that does put the pressure on Amiens to have to get something at Guingamp. And I was looking at the rules that come into play to separate teams that are locked on the same number of points, and there's quite a surprising one. I mean, you know, first of all, it's overall goal difference, which you'd expect, and there are various head-to-head configurations. But if you sort of go down the list, and Amiens and Caen are sort of similar enough records to imagine that they could end up on the same number of points and with comparable goal differences. The 8th factor that comes into play is the club which has scored the highest number of goals in a single league game this season, which I don't think I've ever come across in any other you know, major football championship. I mean, it would take something very peculiar for us to end up you know, having to look at that. But yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting one, seeing how those two teams get on the final day.
Yeah, that would be absolutely crazy. You're right. There's only sort of the same goals for, and then only 2 sort of goals against going against Dijon. Against Caen. That's a very strange one. If it came down to goals scored in a single game, I don't think Caen will be particularly happy. But if it was goals against, at least anyway, in a single game, it might help one side against the other really more than anything in that scenario. But as for Caen, Rich, it was a disappointing result given their recent form, at least anyway, against the Lyon side that they did have chances against when it was 0-0, and Brice Monday saved a penalty as well as pulling out a cracking save in the first half where he sort of almost dived over the ball, but he managed to get his hand back to it after a bit of a deflection. So they kept themselves in it for a decent period, but it ran away with them when they were really chasing the game more than anything and trying to get themselves back into it. But as Tom mentioned, and as we mentioned in the intro, but Bordeaux have, if they're not already on the beach, they might be in a gentle coma really, but as they've been in all season, and it's a real chance for them to get 3 points and put absolutely enormous pressure on Amiens as well.
Absolutely, and this may sound a little harsh on Caen, but they strike me as the sort of cockroach of Ligue. I mean, they always seem to survive. They always seem to scrap, and it's never pretty. Yet season after season, they're in a similar situation that they are now, needing something in the final game. Last two seasons, it's been PSG, and they've dug out a result, be it a win or a draw. They've dug out the result that's got them over the line. You can't bet against them doing the same again. They've had an awful season. They play some of the worst football in the league. I think that's probably there's little argument, I don't think, with regards to that. But in this scenario, they've got those issues in the dugout over who's actually in charge. Is it Mercadal or not? Is it Corbis or not? But they always seem to find a way. So I certainly wouldn't be betting against, and as you say, the woeful form that Bordeaux are in, I certainly wouldn't be betting against Caen picking up the 3 points. But of course, perhaps unlike in years gone by, a win doesn't necessarily guarantee them. So I can see them getting the win, yes. But I can also see Amiens just about doing enough in their final game. Guingamp looked like a completely different side in the game against Nîmes for the sort of opening 45 minutes or so, and then in Guingamp style this season threw it all away. They were 2-0 up, I think, at one point. So I can see Amiens just doing enough, but Caen will be putting the pressure on them without a shadow of a doubt, I don't think.
Well, I think there's going to be one of two scenarios happening this summer. Either Caen are going to give us a ring for merchandising at the cockroaches of Ligue 1, or we're going to get a cease and desist letter from them more than likely to stop referencing in the that. But the odd one out, really, unfortunately for them at the moment, at least, Jez, it is Dijon. They, well, rather unsurprising at least, didn't get anything at PSG, and I don't suppose they expected to. But it does leave them in a great conundrum now. They can't get themselves safe at least, but they can still get that relegation playoff zone should Caen lose and they get a win. The goal difference is pretty vast to say that they can overhaul it that way should Caen draw, but it's at least open for them on the last day. That's the kind of way they would have wanted it. They'll be a bit disappointed that they've dropped a couple of points here and there towards this last third of the season that really could have saved themselves. But again, very much like the other two, a game against Toulouse is not exactly against a side that's got anything left to really play for, and that's been pretty evident for about 12 or 13 games, really, unless Axel Gradell's been involved, really, and they were sort of pummeled in the end by Marseille at the weekend as well. So the door's at least open for them. That's the important thing. That's sometimes all you need on the final day.
Yeah, I mean it's nice that they've still got hope, but I think it would be quite shocking if they were to somehow survive or get to the playoff place, which is the best they can hope for now. I mean, I can conceivably see all three teams winning, but Dijon, obviously, it's not in their hands, and well, Amiens are kind of safe just as regards Dijon, and Caen only really need a point. Which I think they'll get at least a point. So whatever Dijon do, I think that it's probably a little bit too much for them. And similarly to Caen, Dijon, the last couple of years they've played really good football, and I'd say they're probably the flop of the season in a way, because kind of had high hopes that they push on. They brought in a couple of good young players like I don't know how to pronounce it, but Luadici, or I don't know if it's a French or Italian pronunciation, players like that, and that there are some talents there, and I think maybe on reflection they may have regretted getting rid of Dall'Olio as quickly as they did, but whatever the reasons, they've been right down there the whole season, and they couldn't really have too many arguments were they to go down. And I can definitely see them beating Toulouse. I think if I had to put money on one of the bottom three teams not to win at the weekend, I could see Guingamp getting a bit of a surprise result at Amiens. But yeah, I think Dijon have left themselves too much to do. So even with the win, I think they'll probably still finish 19th.
Yeah, they lulled us, didn't they, at the start of the season, getting another couple of great wins to say that they were going to emulate what they did last season, where they were real home warriors. But that's really been their downfall this season. The fact that they couldn't score goals and they weren't great defensively last season, and they've not really improved in that fact, has just really annihilated them this season. And at least they've got a little bit of hope. And I am going to go around the houses and see if there is going to be a final twist on the last day and get some predictions. Tom, do you think it stays as it is, or do you think there's maybe one final little twist in the tail?
I'm with Jez on this. I can see all the teams that need wins getting wins, which would leave the status quo as it is. I mean, I guess the fact that the fact that we're all backing Caen to beat Bordeaux because Bordeaux's form is so dreadful and because Caen have, had this sort of belated second wind. I mean, usually in football, that sort of certainty is usually a decent indication that things will not turn out as you expect them to. But yeah, I can see that. I can see those teams, Amiens, Caen, Dijon, all getting the wins they need, and things remaining as they are.
Rich?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think things will probably. I'd agree as Tom said with Jez in terms of I think I could probably see all three teams winning, leaving Antoine Kombouara with the slightly unfortunate title of being able to say he took two teams down in one season, pretty much. I don't think that's necessarily happened before. So I can't see things changing enough for Dijon or Caen to get to safety.
Yeah, it'd be a real hammer blow for his reputation, wouldn't it be, if Dijon do confirm their relegation? Jez, I kind of guess where you're going at least, but I want to add a little bit of spice to yours. And since you've been a little bit of a viewer of Ligue 2 football, at least this season, is there any chance that if, for example, if Caen are heading into that relegation playoff, is there anyone in Ligue 2 that will give them a right go or has a great chance of troubling one of the Ligue 1 sides in the playoff?
Yeah, I mean, Troyes have been in fantastic form second half of the season, so they're certainly a match for anyone right now. And Paris FC, obviously, there's the sort of tantalising carrot of a Paris derby next year where they go up. But they've been so good defensively, and Caen not exactly a prolific free-scoring team. So if it was one of those two, then I could definitely see them getting through over two legs. Lens, I'm not so sure about. They seem so inconsistent, and it depends which one turns up. But at the same time, their fans are so good that if they can really get behind them and they can get a result in their home leg, then you never know. But I mean, I'd expect, and certainly if there's injustice in the world, 12 will probably get through. And yeah, I think there would be kind of two legs.
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone then that if it is Paris FC versus Caen, maybe put that one on record and put it on a little bit of a fast forward just in case, because it might not have too many chances in it should it end up that way. Let's go back to the sort of upper echelons of the table, because a number of European qualifiers were confirmed. In fact, all of the remaining Ligue 1 European qualifiers were confirmed, and we'll start with Lyon. Tom, they got a great result. It's great to see Moussa Dembele actually play and start and score goals, because we'd mentioned last week that he sort of maybe was trying to get others in the shop window that meant that he wasn't starting games. But great result for them. But at the same time, it's going to be an interesting summer. We now know what the picture is going to look like with Juninho in the background and Silvinho as the manager. It's an inexperienced duo in both roles. It's, while obviously Lyon fans have a great affection for Juninho, and that will help him in the short term. In the medium term, it will all depend on results, and it's a bit of a risk for a club of this size.
Right, a massive risk. I mean, it's a massive risk. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how it works, because no sooner had Jean-Michel Aulas announced that Bruno Genesi will be leaving at the end of the season, and he was starting to talk about the sort of coach he'd like to bring in, and he was saying that his ideal profile would be, a former Lyon player, either a Frenchman or at least a French speaker, someone with decent top level experience. And Silvinho has none of those things. As far as I can tell, he doesn't speak any French as things stand. I'm sure he's probably swatting up pretty hard already, which makes me think that Juninho Pernambucano will probably have a fairly broad remit, and it will be a different dynamic to the one that we've seen at Lyon in the last few seasons, and just interesting to see how it's going to work, the dynamic between Silvinho and Juninho. I mean, clearly, Juninho is going to be the main point of contact with the president and with his various advisors, and you suspect that Silvinho will be left to concentrate on the training ground and will be very much a sort of bags of balls and cones coach. But yeah, a pretty striking departure. I was looking back, the last time that Lyon had a non-French coach was Vladimir Kovacevic in sort of early to mid '80s. So a real departure for Lyon. And Jean-Michel Aulas said, part of being a businessman is taking risks, and he certainly seems to be taking one here.
Yeah, it seems like an unusual appointment. Not necessarily Juninho, Rich. We obviously the famous free kick taker's a big favourite in Lyon, and he'll be a good man to sort of be that sort of buffer between manager and the dressing room and the upper echelon of the club, at least anyway, and he may take a bigger role as it goes on. But Aulas has put a lot of faith in him as well for him to allow him to pick the manager and bring him in as a team. It shows that Aulas at least has a lot of belief in them. So there's a lot of pressure on those shoulders straight away, depending on if they get in the Champions League or group stages or not, depending obviously how the Europa League final finishes, and obviously to have a summer where they get value for money for players and also bring a quality back in as well. It's a tough job, and for someone who's not really been in that kind of role before, despite his affection for Lyon, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, at least Juninho's going to know how Aulas works. There's a relationship, a pre-existing relationship there. So he wouldn't have been surprised to have seen Aulas come out in classic Aulas style to say, "Yes, I'm the one that started negotiations, that invited PSG into the negotiations for Ndombele," which, if you're a manager, you're pulling your hair thinking, why is my president saying this? What on earth is going on here? Juninho's going to know that. Juninho's going to expect that. As Tom mentioned, I think what's going to be really interesting here is to see how the relationships play out. Silvinho is going to be so heavily reliant on Juninho and his knowledge of the squad and his relationship then in turn with Aulas. But you've got a lot of senior people at Lyon. You've got Florian Maurice, you've got Bernard Lecomte, you've got Gerard Houllier, who've all got the ear of Aulas. You've now added Juninho into the mix. It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, to see who goes from the squad. Aulas has apparently said that he's promised Juninho that only one or two big name players would go, and that seemingly is Ndombele and Nabil Fekir. I don't know how much faith I would put in that word, and I suppose it depends whether you count players like Memphis Depay as big name players or not. But it's one that I don't think anybody saw coming. Juninho, I think possibly we saw playing some part. He'd been linked for some time, I think, to come into at some point of the Lyon structure, be it at a youth training level, not necessarily at a sporting director level. That's quite a senior position for him to come in at. But then Silvinho, that's as left field as you could possibly get in terms of an actual day-to-day first team coach. He's got experience with the Brazilian setup. He's got experience working with managers like Roberto Mancini. But this is obviously a big step up. Lyon fans, as we've seen towards the end of Genesio's days, are a very demanding bunch. And despite everything that PSG do, Lyon fans seem to believe that they should be pushing PSG close, which, I have my own thoughts and opinions on that. So it's the pair of them have really been thrown in at the deep end. Juninho will get a little bit longer on the honeymoon period purely because of who he is and the club he's at. But it potentially could be a real baptism of fire, I think, for Silvinho. And, of course, that in turn will reflect on Aulas. He came out recently to say that, before he steps away from Lyon, he wants to bring more trophy success. He wants to win the league again. This is a very curious appointment. I don't think anybody's going to know how it's going to turn out, partly because we don't really know what Lyon as a squad's going to look like come match day 1 next season. So it's certainly a move that's going to bring even more interest, I think, to Lyon and their summer activities.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And on Silvinho, Richard's touched on it already, Jez, that he's had experience, obviously, at Inter Milan as an assistant and as a technique coach, as they sort of called it, and an assistant at Brazil, as well as doing the under-23s role, sort of combining the two. He's obviously a well-known name in England as well. Had a good time at Arsenal and Manchester City. He's sort of more of a bit part player, really, and even a long period at Barcelona, where, again, he was not really a starter, you would say, more of a sort of a backup, really, which sometimes you see in coaches, to be fair, but he's got a lot of top level experience. So at the same time, while this is his first managerial role and it's really jumping in the deep end, he's had experience at big clubs in the past, and he's had experience even a coaching role in bigger setups, because if there's anywhere bigger than Brazil, really, to be coaching in terms of an international club, I'd like to see it, really, more than anything. But no matter, that's at least going to help him in these first couple of months, but it's a big job.
He's as a player and in his sort of small career as a coach, he's worked with some fantastic players and some fantastic coaches. So he's bound to have taken a lot of that kind of thing on. But there's been so many cases that even with some of what look like the top coaches in the world, going back to people like Brian Kidd under Ferguson here, and Paul Clement, who obviously has always done such a great job coaching under Ancelotti. But when it comes to them taking the main job, they've suddenly been found wanting. So it's such a big risk for Silvinho, because even in his coaching career, he's never been the head coach, and I guess that's where the thinking comes that Juninho is going to take some of those sort of head coach responsibilities off him, and then they'll share the job. But then Juninho also hasn't really got that much experience or any experience as a sporting director either. So it doesn't matter that he's a club legend. If they're not getting the results, he might not get the same kind of stick that other people get, but they can only really be judged on results. So it's a huge risk, and it's fascinating on Olas's part, because for all the reasons that Tom said, that Silvinho kind of doesn't tick any of the boxes that Olas made a big play about, but also just the fact that Olas clearly looks to be taking a step back. It was, by all accounts, it was entirely Juninho's call that Silvinho was appointed, and may or may not have been sort of the deal breaker for Juninho coming in. And so for Olas to give someone that kind of power, even if it was sort of probably the legendary player of his tenure as president, to not be undermined, but to very publicly say, I'm letting someone else make such a huge choice for the club that I've run for the last 40 odd years, is really fascinating, I think, and certainly seems to be the first indication that Olas may be on his way out. But the concern is that there's a lot of chiefs there, and there's rumours that Florian Maurice is thinking of leaving, and I think he's done a very underrated job as recruiter. That one could be interesting, because he's an ex-teammate of Silvinho at Celta Vigo. So I don't know if he had a say in Silvinho coming in, but possibly Leon were relying on that kind of previous connection helping Silvinho settle as well. There's a lot of people there who aren't used to sort of allowing others to make decisions, and you wonder if at some point something's going to break there. So it's fascinating, and whether it works or doesn't work, I think going to be possibly rivaling PSG for the sort of soap opera side of Ligue next year.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going to be boring, at least anyway. And I think the sigh of collective relief that it won't be a Mourinho season, at least at Lyon, will be. We've sort of heard through the channel, I think, more than anything. But let's go to the other side, that we're chasing them, but fell short. But at the same time, they've got European football for first time in a good few seasons. Tom, in Saint-Etienne, they've had a terrific season, but they've had a sort of bombshell today, because Jean-Louis Gasset will not be returning as manager. It's believed that he's going to be retiring to spend more time with his family. Montpellier had offered him sort of a role further upstairs, but he's declined it to stay up. It's been a great season for him, and it would be a real disappointment for Saint-Etienne, especially a number of their players who might even go as well. It's sort of a bitter pill to swallow now that they're going to be facing a Europa League potentially with a completely different squad and definitely a completely different manager.
Yeah, it's a pity. I think Saint-Etienne's resurgence in many ways has been the story of Jean-Louis Gasset, getting to grips with the team and getting them on this upward curve and managing to harness this momentum that's carried them all the way from a relegation battle, which is the situation he inherited when he took over midway through last season, to knocking on the door of Champions League qualification. I mean, until they lost at home to Montpellier, when was that? Weekend before last, they were still an outside chance for top three. They've ended up getting top four. Fantastic end to the season. Some really impressive results. They're Hatem Ben Arfa's favourite team in France, so there's that as well. Everything seems to be moving in the right direction. And then suddenly you get this bombshell that Gasset doesn't want to continue the adventure. And I found it quite moving, actually, looking at the images of him on the lap of appreciation after the game against Nice at the weekend, and clearly wanting to take a moment for himself, and obviously mulling over so many different things going through his head. He's clearly identifies really closely with the club, and you can see how highly he's thought of both by the players, by the fans. And as you alluded to, I mean, a number of players have already said that they won't stick around if Gasset goes. Yann Villa chief among them. But it's obviously something that he's given an awful lot of thought to, and his quotes after the game on Saturday, and he was asked about his future, and just kept talking about how tired he was. He just wanted to go home and sleep. And I know he's 65, but you'd expect there to be a little bit more celebration in the air at the end of a season like the season that Saint-Etienne have had. But I suppose it's just an indication of the fact that he clearly does feel a bit worn out. We know how attached he is to Montpellier, his hometown, and clearly he feels that he's gone as far as he wants to go with Saint-Etienne. I suppose what you wonder now is whether, had he perhaps been given more assurances about how much the squad would be strengthened over the summer, whether that might have persuaded him to stick around, and maybe we'll get some clarity on that over the next few days and weeks. But yeah, a pity for Saint-Etienne, really. Obviously, one of the great names of French football, and here they are, back in Europe with a Europa League campaign to look forward to, and suddenly they find themselves facing quite an uncertain summer, when ideally they'd have been going into it, looking to build ahead of this new campaign, and make a really, really strong start to next season, and really throw everything they've got into the Europa League. Yeah,
and it's an unsavoury one at the same time, Rich. He was seemingly a bit downtrodden the last couple of weeks, and mentioned that he was going to make talks with the club, and they're going to have a sit down with the board, and mentioning the size of the squad not being big enough, and there was rumours of sort of conflict between him and higher ups, and the fact that he maybe wanted a little bit more freedom into expanding the squad and having a better chance at Europe. That's maybe those battles have wore him out and convinced him that maybe it is the time to leave and go back to his family. So it'll be disappointing to see him go, but at the same time, Saint-Etienne may have to have a look at themselves and how they're structuring themselves, and where they want to be as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold move from Saint-Etienne to sort of allow him to effectively walk away. A number of their key players this season have been very vocal on the fact that their future with the club was directly linked to Gasset remaining with the club. You look at Yann Villa, who I think has been reborn really since moving back and joining Saint-Etienne. I think he's really looked almost back to his very best, I felt, since his move back to France. You look at the likes of Mathieu Debuchy. I think he's had a successful time at Saint-Etienne. You look at Wabi Kazri, you look at Remy Cabella. All of them have made suggestions, perhaps none as vocal as Mvia, but all have made suggestions that Gasset is a key part of their factor and decision making for staying at Saint-Etienne. So for the executive committee of Saint-Etienne, and it's that executive committee where there's 3 or 4 of them rather than sort of one individual president, there seems to be this executive committee at Saint-Etienne who don't really ever seem to pull in the same direction. It's never ever felt a sort of cohesive, all three are working in the same direction. It's always seemed as though there's always at least one trying to take them off and not quite agreeing with the way that it's moving. And it's obviously going to make things difficult for a coach like Gasset, who wants that certainty, wants that understanding of this is what needs to be done to the squad and I need the insurances. So it's never going to be easy. It's as I say, it's a dangerous game because this Saint-Etienne team, who have done so well this season under Gasset, with him leaving, a number of these players will leave. I don't think there's any ifs or buts about this. They will leave. Yann M'Vila will leave. Mathieu Debuchy, it's been reported tonight, will leave. So it's risky. It's risky. And then all of a sudden, we're opening the door to, their big asset, if you like, is William Saliba, the young centre-back who they've just tied up to a new contract. And then, of course, they drop the bombshell of Gasset leaving. Gasset has been a big fan of Saliba and helped with his development this season. With Gasset going, all of a sudden that opens the door, and we saw yesterday or the day before, Arsenal have already been linked with a 25 to 30 million euro move for him. They won't be alone in that. He's been rumoured to have the interest of a number of clubs around Europe. So, it potentially could turn into a very messy summer, I think, for Saint-Etienne, with a number of players going, their big prized assets going. So any new coach coming into Saint-Etienne is going to find themselves facing quite an uphill task, I think.
Yeah, just looking at people to potentially come in at least now, and the sort of market at the moment looks like it's pointing towards Claude Puel, who's obviously been out of a job since he left Leicester, and even Laurent Blanc's been linked. Who do you think was the right man to take over? Because this is a different Saint-Etienne team now. They've been playing much better attacking football than they have previously under previous management regimes, and they're less in chaos. But at the same time, this team could look completely different in the summer, so it's finding the right man.
It is. I mean, Claude Puel has also been linked with Marseille, and possibly that's the bigger draw. Though this evening, Marseille been linked with Heinze, so yeah, Puel might be looking elsewhere. And he's got a great pedigree in France, so it's and obviously Saint-Etienne being the great club they are, that could prove a good move all round, and Puel's got such a great record bringing through youth players, and Saint-Etienne won the Coupe Gambardella this year, so as well as Saliba, they've got a lot of good young players to come through, so that could be an option. I don't know if you'd want to, but I'd quite like Patin to be possibly to get another head coach role. He's certainly in terms of Cabella, he's maybe if Villa is sort of Gasset's spiritual son, Cabella is Patin's, and maybe if they're keen to keep him in, that could be an option. And if not, I mean, I don't know if he'd be tempted, but I'd love to see Lopez get a chance at one of the really big name clubs, and due respect to Strasbourg. I think it would be great to see what he could do in Europe. Saint-Etienne should be a real draw for any coach. There is that issue with the directors. It's a bit like this push and pull and Dr. Doolittle. They were putting in different ways, and Solanaya and obviously Rochetor, who are seen to always be vying for control with each other, which is an issue. But the fact is that they qualified for Europe. They've got that amazing stadium and crowd behind them. It should be a draw. And frankly, even in terms of the players, and even those who've been threatening to leave, I'd be a bit disappointed in a few of them leaving. I think it would show a bit of a lack of ambition. Villa, who is for the most part disappointed since right at the start of his career, and you've got those early French caps, and the whole squad was banned post 2010. He hasn't really fulfilled his potential. And Gasset or no Gasset, I'd like some of these players to maybe show a little bit more loyalty to the club that they're currently employed by. In Villa's case, the club that arguably has kind of saved his career, and also just show, unless they get better offers elsewhere, show the ambition to want to play in Europe. They earned the right to be there. I think it would be a real pity, not just for Saint-Etienne as a club, but for those players as well, to possibly kind of turn down that chance to test themselves against some of the best players and teams on the continent.
Yeah, Ligue 1's going to have a insane summer from the sounds of things, and we may even talk about later in the week, maybe even a Marseille departure yet. It's not been confirmed, although reportedly Rudy Garcia has told his players that he is to leave at the end of the season, but we'll sort of still sit on that one at least anyway until that actually happens. Let's finish this evening with our Ligue 1 snapshots, our stories from the week that you may not have heard about and we've not spoken about this evening. And I'll start with yourself, Tom. What's your Ligue 1 snapshot?
Well, I thought I'd pay tribute to two long-serving Ligue 1 midfielders who both bade farewell to the home fans of their respective clubs today. Etienne Didot at Guingamp and Yaroslav Plazil at Bordeaux. And as a 30-something midfielder myself, very much in the twilight of my career, it always saddens me to see players of about that age hanging their boots up. But yes, two players who've been big fixtures on the Ligue 1 scenery. And I think I might say they both lost. Did they both lose at the weekend? No, Guingamp drew, didn't they? But so no happy send off in front of their home fans. But two players who we've got a lot of pleasure from watching these last few years.
Yeah, like we mentioned before the start, I'm sure the three fans that turned up to the Bordeaux game maybe clapped off Plashio, bless him, maybe not the greatest send-off. Rich, what's your Ligue 1 snapshot?
Mine's a bit of a cheat one because mine actually isn't Ligue 1. Mine is the Women's Champions League final. Took place at the weekend, and the absolute juggernaut that is Lyon won again. That's their fourth Champions League success in a row. Swept aside Barcelona with comparative ease, 4-1. It's 4-0 at half time. 16-minute hat trick from Ada Hegerberg. As easy as you like, really. They really took their foot off the gas, but in line with a really excellent article actually I read during the week from Rory Smith for the New York Times on the world's best team is the team you've never heard of. They really lived up to that moniker because they were absolutely dominant, and it's going to take something, I think, to stop this. As I say, that's their fourth Champions League success in a row. I think that's 6 in the last 9 tournaments they've won. They just are absolutely relentless. Hegerberg takes all the plaudits, but it's a real team performance. They have talent from front to back. They are a real joy to watch.
Jez?
Mine are a couple of LFP related ones. The first one is that this weekend was the weekend that all the captains are due to wear rainbow armbands to promote LGBT plus equality. And I wouldn't say it turned into a farce. Most of the captains did wear them, but there was a kind of distraction of 3 of them not wearing them, a couple ditching them, saying that they were too big and they were too small and they didn't fit on their bicep. At Lyon, there were lots of rumours that both Fekir faked an injury because he didn't want to wear one, and that Jeremy Morel was captain, and Lyon kind of protested, but he's been a great servant to the club and it's his last match. But a lot of people were saying, well, Marcelo is playing, it's probably his last match, and he's vice captain, and Fekir doesn't play, and he also happens to support the extreme right in Brazil. And so there are a few rumours about how and why people are getting away without wearing it. But overall, I think it's obviously a great campaign and an important thing for the LFP to get behind, and small steps, but hopefully it's something that's going to promote a lot more tolerance. And the other thing, just quickly with the LFP, is that there were things on social media about Dijon fans who said not only are we probably going to get relegated. Not only have we just been smashed 4-0, but we've now sort of suffered the humiliation and disappointment of being shut out of the Parc des Princes, and you can't even see the title giving ceremony. And apparently this is some kind of LFP protocol that happens in Ligue that the away fans are sort of shipped out before the title and the trophy is given. But I think it's ridiculous, and I think this is it's been a bit of a sweeper the last 2 or 3 years, but it's becoming more and more of a problem, just how badly away fans are treated. And there isn't really an away fan culture in France like there is in England anyway. But if they wanted to encourage that, they're going absolutely the wrong way about it with the bans and then this kind of thing as well. And I think it's something that people really need to look at and work on going forward.
Yeah, it was strange about the rainbow armbands. I remember seeing that Falcao reportedly didn't wear it because it was a bit too large for his bicep. I was just thinking either get swole or buy a stapler. It seemed like a bit of a common complaint as well. Very strange. I've got 2 quick ones. It looks interesting that yet again in the sort of French papers that Nice are being linked to a potential takeover by Sir Jim Radcliffe again. Supposedly the offer is much larger than market value to try and get something over the line, and his interest in football and investing in it in French football as well, and his love for the area would be really interesting to see what he could do with Vieira at the helm as well, and a bit of money behind him to see what else could be done. And also finally, for another sort of one on the UNFP, we always have someone that's awfully dressed. It was Memphis Depay in his marching band outfit last season. This season it's Adil Rami, who looks part pirate, part cowboy as our Twitter feed. I think he looks much more like a pirate. He's got a very good mustache, but maybe not the greatest choice of coat, at least anyway. Pamela should maybe have talked to him a little bit before they exited.
And he plays like he's only got one eye and one leg.
Yeah, exactly. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Jez, Rich, Tom, and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show, which will be for the final weekend on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.